partnership working. The exciting thing about discussions that we have now about school exclusions and alternative provision is that we've had so much debate in the last few years, and following the Timothy review, we're now really able to get into discussions where we talk about how things work. So instead of arguing about what's the right level of exclusions, what we wanted to do today is really talk about how different agencies and different partners can come together to get the best outcomes for children who are being educated outside of the mainstream. So it's great to welcome so many of you here today who work in related areas to alternative provision, in alternative provision schools, in the PRUs, with charities and related services. So thank you so much for coming. Thank you very much to Vicky for managing to stay on. I'm afraid Emma Hardy, our other MP, had to leave for Hull since they've been recalled suddenly to Parliament for tomorrow. She has to whiz back to Hull tonight and then be back in London later this evening or first thing this morning. So she sends her apologies for not being here, but she's got a strong interest in being on the Education Select Committee in this area and would like to take part in the discussion. Thankfully, I've got a last-minute celebrity stand-in in the world of PRUs and AP. We've got the president of the PRUs AP Membership Association for PRUs and APs across the country. Sarah's just come from an AP meeting, I believe, at the DFE, so she's hot off the discussion table with the Department for Education on all issues related to alternative provision. So it's really nice to have you with us, and thank you for stepping at the last minute, Sarah. So we also have Julia Smart from St Giles Trust. Each of these people will introduce themselves better. I'll just give a quick hello. Ed Baker from Bridge Academy, Feltham in West London. And we've got Jeff Barton, the General Secretary of the Association of School and College Leaders here. So, the topic today is children who are being educated outside the mainstream. These are our most vulnerable children, with 10% of looked after children educated in AP compared to 1% of the rest of the population. 1 in 50 children in AP have an identified social, emotional and mental health need, compared to, 1 in 50 of the population, but 1 in 2 children in alternative provision has an identified social, emotional and mental health need. And 42% of the adult prison population was permanently excluded from school as a child. So what we're talking about is how to improve the outcomes for these children. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves for 2 minutes, and then we're going to start looking at some topics of discussion. So I will start, Jeff, you start us off.
Yeah, hello there everyone. Can you hear me if I do assembly voice? Thank you very much. So I represent 19,000 or so leaders of schools and colleges, and I want to talk briefly about 2 things. I want to say something about schools, and I want to say something about the world outside of schools, and see if it makes sense. So let's just say something about schools. If we want to stop young people being permanently excluded, we do, then what we need to do is to make sure that for the majority of young people, the vast majority, school works for them. What that means is a curriculum, an assessment system, qualifications that validate what they do, a behaviour process which helps them to learn how to behave better if they're not behaving better, and other adults within school who can help them if they need special support. That's the kind of school which I tried to run for 15 years as a head. It's become harder and harder for people to do because of funding issues, but we need to get back to a sense of the school community keeping the majority of young people in. And then you get to the world outside schools, which is where we talk about alternative provision. Alternative provision is rated good or outstanding by about 80% of them are by Ofsted. So it's how do we make them feel part of the process? And it seems to us that what we should be talking about is accountability. How are you measured? Because at the moment, as a leader of a school or college, it feels like you are in competition with other places. And what does inclusive accountability look like? What would it mean that the child who walks through my door in year 7, even if they move to alternative provision or they move to your school, still somehow shows up on the accountability for my school? That is problematic, right? And I'll talk to you when I've got less than a minute to be able to say why that's problematic. But there is a second idea which maybe we could explore tonight. What if we were to say that in our community, whatever that was, where there are primary schools and secondary schools, there's alternative provision, there's VRUs and so on, what if we were to say that we're not any longer just going to talk about accountability, we're going to talk now about responsibility. What's the responsibility I have as a leader for the young people within my school gates, but also the ones around there, and what does that look like in practice? That's a really interesting idea in a fledgling system, and it could be one that starts from what are we doing for the most vulnerable children in our system.
Yeah, so my name's Ed Becker. I set up a school called the Reach Academy in Felton in 2012, and in 2017 set up a charity called the Reach Children's Hub, offering cradle to career support for young people. I had three quick ideas I wanted to share. The first one is that when I think about our most vulnerable pupils, in every single case they experience trauma between them. I think that at the moment, policy is far behind what we now know about the importance of that period. And yet it is when parents and families are listening to support throughout the child's life. So I think that's one thing. The second thing is, at the moment, I don't think that our admission system ensures that all schools take their fair share of the most vulnerable children. And I think, as a head of a mainstream school, I really want to support the most vulnerable, but there is also a tipping point where there's a capacity issue in our schools, and I think all schools need to make sure that they're taking their fair share of the most vulnerable young people. And then the third idea, we set up this Cradle to Career organisation. At the moment in Felton, the young people who need support most are being bombarded with lots of different organisations seeking to work with them, and they're not experiencing coordination and clarity about where they can access support and how that support is organised. And so I think there's a role that we can play in local communities. I think schools have a great role to play here in helping to make sure that support is accessible easily for all.
Please bear in mind that I've had about 5 minutes to prepare for this, so it won't be as polished as others. My name is Sarah Dove. As already introduced, I'm the president of the national organisation CRUSAP, which aims to be the voice of AP. But I've also worked in CRUS and AP for the last 18 years, which gives you a clue about my age. I've worked in AP such as those primarily for young people with behaviour needs, medical and mixed as well. It's an area that I really love. I could work in mainstream. AP crew is where I really feel I fit. When we talk about exclusions, our views on children often fall from the stereotype of a certain child. But certainly there has been a change around the narrative of the bad child to talk about more trauma-informed approaches. We're becoming more accustomed to this, but there's still that narrative around APs and CRUs in the media and so on about being spaces where you send the child when it's the end. When I did some research for my PhD, I worked with young people about what their experiences were of mainstream and AP. And one of the themes was around belonging. How do we understand how young people feel like they belong within mainstream school, how they feel they're part of the community, that actually we are all responsible for those children, irrespective of their behaviour, their special needs, their ethnicity, they're part of our community. And one of the things we don't really spoke about overwhelmingly is that actually AP, because there was more time and space to develop relationships, actually belonging to something that they felt within AP. So I wonder, how do we transfer that to how do children feel part of something bigger within mainstream education? I also wonder about ethical leadership. So where we have issues around off-rolling or young people falling through the net, how do we as a community of schools use the ethical leadership framework to really think about young people's education and not othering people so that they fall through the cracks of education? I haven't got it, sorry.
Alright, so good evening to you all. My name is Mark. I am the founder of the SOS Gangs Project, the largest ex-convict project of this type in the country. We're working with young people known up with gangs, but serious youth violence and what we call lifestyle choices. My background is to be on the trying to help, making the wrong choice that's going to be sent down in 2001 for drugs-related events like we do. And in that time I decided I'd turn my life around. There's lots of different labels being bandied around about me now for being a social entrepreneur. I work and develop new services and programs to help young people disengage and break away from negative lifestyle choices. The funniest one I heard this morning was gangs whisperer. What does that mean? I'm going to some sort of paddock and start rubbing gang members' noses. Or maybe I offer them chicken. Yeah? You never know. What I do is, as you can tell, what I'm about is bringing the realness to this kind of debate, and I think there's a lot here that has to be said in terms of, young people such as myself that drop out of education or have actual external issues and things that are going on for them, they're seeing it as having low societal value. And the reality is, you can label it how you want, but we exclude kids too easy. And as the lady said, it is seen as the end of the road. Another big thing that has to be said is prevention. We're dealing with young people that are involved in these criminal lifestyle choices, and you can take every single case back. And actually the question is how early is too early to provide an intervention. The third thing that has to be said is you always do what doesn't work. So right now they're talking about Scotland, violence reduction unit, amazing. But what they're talking about in terms of exclusions, in terms of prisons, is almost the American model. Let's build more prisons, let's exclude more kids. This has got to change if we want to get that right. Thank you.
So my name is Vicky Foxcroft, I'm the MP for Lewisham Deptford. I'm also the shadow member for Civil Society. Also, I chair the Youth Violence Commission, and part of the Youth Violence Commission's remit and aim was very much to look at the root causes of youth violence and how we go about preventing it. And we had a number of different recommendations, one of them being around a public health approach where all of the different agencies can work together, just what Julia was referring to in terms of violence reduction units and how they work. But we also had other recommendations within that, and one of them was a move towards zero exclusions. I think that all of the evidence goes and points to that. That should be something that we're aiming towards. Now, I've done a number of debates on this in Parliament, and quite often met with certain amounts of criticism, including Sarah, who we now, I think, get on and have a dialogue on stuff. But I think the point is, if you want to go and aim towards something, you have to take and utilise and work with all of the experts in the field. And those that work within AP, proofs, etc., have got a lot of expertise that can be used to go and ensure that we get close towards meeting our aspiration of zero exclusions. Because we have to be honest in terms of the trajectory of our young people when they are excluded from school, in terms of the likelihood to be susceptible towards grooming, but also be susceptible towards a life in prison in the future. And that's not what we want. We really need to think, how can we go and prevent that, and what are the stages that we can go and intervene earlier to make sure that we prevent it. And it probably isn't just one intervention at one point, it's probably a multitude of them. So I'm looking forward to this evening. It was one of the things that I was very keen to make sure that I took part in, because I think that we'll have some really good discussions this evening.
Thank you all. The way we're going to have this discussion, I'm going to ask a few themed questions first of all to the panellists, and then we're going to move on to audience questions. And I'd like to start with the basics of partnership working, which is the who and the how. So the main question here is who should be playing the key working role, the glue in the system that is the body that is tracking these children and making sure that once they are excluded from the school, they're getting the right provision, they're being followed up, they're being reintegrated into mainstream if necessary, they're getting the right support. So in some areas, for example Cambridgeshire, the local authority is very actively taking this role, they keep a database of the children outside the mainstream. Whenever in Bexley, the crew there takes more of an active role, as it's going to be delegated by the local authority to play this role for the students in the area. And there's also been talk of giving more of this responsibility to mainstream schools. So what I would like to know from the panellists is really, if we've got children falling through the gaps, who is the responsible body that should be taking responsibility for these children when they leave mainstream or for prevention?
Do we need to stand up, or are we okay now? Sitting down? It's probably a bonus for you if you can't see me, to be honest. So I think probably with this one, what I'd go back to is the idea that at the moment we're in an atomised system. It's become more atomised since 2010, essentially, and our accountability kind of reinforces a sense that, that I'm ultimately responsible for young people in my school. But there are examples, and we've heard them from Kath, of schools which are looking beyond their own school gates and working in partnership. And essentially in a young system, we now need to be seeing how does that work. Now it would feel to me, as someone who came into teaching 32 years ago, that the idea of there being some kind of locality board or education partnership or something which is holding up a mirror to ourselves and saying, how are those young people doing, both in terms of traditional measurements, so how are they doing their English, maths and academic qualifications, how are we doing collectively in terms of obesity rates, how many children have taken part in music events or sport events, something which gets us back to what is it we want our young people to have experienced. That seems to me a good thing. We would probably say, as an association, given that half of the nation's children are now educated in academies and 70% of secondary schools are academies, that we wouldn't see this as a local authority model. It might be that in some places that works. We think probably sub-locality, sub-local authority, but that is going to look different in Norfolk from the way it's going to look in parts of the West Midlands, if you see what I mean. And that's where we will all be feeling our way. But the underpinning principle of how do we have a group of people responsible for the education in its broadest sense of these young people and holding a mirror up to ourselves and reporting on that, that would seem to me a way of breaking a currently very fragmented system and doing the right thing for every child, starting from the point of view of the most vulnerable child.
I think we need to remember that young people who use cruise mainly aren't just children are excluded from school. So whilst I recognise what you're saying in terms of academies and so on, I think the statutory responsibility should remain on the local authority. That is the admission authority that you have it only. But I also see the idea of actually really robust fair access protocols, which are again using the framework of being ethical and working together as a community and not just shoving children from place to place. That's really important as well, especially when we know that some of the young people that we are working with have really educational background as well as a family background, actually moving
I think so in Hounslow we have a company, a school-run company, and that school-run company, all the schools, well, 95% of schools pay a per pupil subscription, and that is the body that coordinates this work and makes sure we don't have pupils missing in education. As a head teacher, I can tell you that the reason sometimes it's really difficult to make the moral and ethical choice, because you are thinking about the education of the other 899 children as well as this particular pupil. And you're also thinking about, frankly, your results, and it's a little bit like being a football manager. Like if your results aren't good, people disappear, and that happened this summer with friends of mine, and it's really, really hard. One of the ways that I am encouraged and persuaded to continue to operate ethically and morally is to know that every half a term I sit in a room with all the other head teachers in Hounslow, and we have a discussion about where we all are. And I think that mutual accountability and that shared responsibility is really important to making sure that we are all operating with, as Jeff said, with the interests of every child in the borough in mind. And so I think whether it's coordinated, who it's coordinated by, I think is less important than the importance of those personal relationships. And schools have to make a commitment to do that now, because that meeting might be in addition to a meeting they have with their multi-academy trust or a meeting they have with the diocese's board. But I think that local meeting feels very, very important, and those local relationships and that mutual accountability feels really important.
Yeah, I think when we kind of talk about early intervention and prevention to make sure that this doesn't happen and that our kids are not falling through the cracks, I think that this is one of our problems, is who is responsible? Who is it that we're going to go and lay that responsibility with? Well, it should be everybody's responsibility that comes into contact with our young people. If they are known to social services, it should be the social services. If they're known in terms of doctor or hospital admissions, then they should be. If they're known to state and neighbourhood teams, they should be. Every primary school head teacher that I speak to from Lewisham and Deptford could tell me the list of kids that they believe are going to be excluded in the future. So why are we not doing something with that information far earlier to make sure that our kids then don't go and enter into secondary school and end up being excluded? So when we talk about a public health approach, and we need to talk about it across a piece, you know, this is it. Everybody working together to make sure that this doesn't happen, and not just having to kind of pop the blame, you know, with one person, but actually for us all to take responsibility and work together collectively to find the best solutions to make sure that that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I agree completely with my counterparts about this. I think for me, I think what really resonated with me from the Simpsons report was schools taking, being responsible for the kids that exclude. And what I thought was quite powerful there is because at the moment we're in this drag and drop culture. And it's not saying that some kids haven't, you know, in order to protect, I take my help to the teachers, in order to protect the rest of the population at that school, or in order to stop there being further disruption, and I totally get it. With, you know, the way that the cuts were hit, we've got to admit that the schools, they're under pressure, and what I see is a lack of will at all. But what I think is how different would it be if actually the schools had to take responsibility for every single people that they exclude and where they go? What difference would that mean if they were still responsible for that child's outcomes after they were excluded? Or maybe what you can stop seeing is that all of the negative kids that get excluded get sent to one big division within the borough, so actually the kids' likelihood of them exiting or persistence actually does the reverse and goes sky high. What you would probably see is less of a drag and drop attitude, like okay, it's not here, it's not our problem, it's not our concern, especially if that's linked to funding. But also what we probably see is more of a willingness for joined up approaches. We keep hearing about this trauma-informed practice, we keep hearing about this communication amongst agencies, but what I see on the ground is far different from that, unfortunately. And I still see, and even if they were communicating, the gangs are communicating in a far more rapid term. We have to adapt, we have to change, we have to keep up with that. So I think actually that's the kind of change I'd like to see.
And just to kind of pick up on that, but also what Vicky said, we have this strange double think, it seems to me, that what we want our schools to do is to make as many children be able to get their EBAC qualifications and so on and so forth. And at the same time what we want, you know, as soon as there was the worry about knife crime, we had a knife crime summit, it was schools who were the ones who were kind of called upon to do more about it. Now I think we just need to think of what our schools are for. And you know, after the Manchester meeting, a head teacher phoned me saying how the parents were looking to the schools to help protect those children and help with the counselling of those children and to give advice to those children. And what he said to me is, who else could they look to? He says, because the police aren't on the streets, the church has shriveled away largely, there aren't any kind of youth clubs and so on and so forth. So if what we're saying is we've got a fragmented society and we're now going to have schools as academic hubs but doing other things around them, that would seem to me is good for society. It's actually a good thing that schools should be doing, and it's definitely good for young people.
I'd like to move on to talking a bit about curriculum and also results. So we've already mentioned a few things to do with that. So there's been a lot of talk about this idea that if mainstream schools were to be held accountable for the results of the children that they exclude, that might prevent them from excluding as much, and or it might mean that they track the children after they've excluded them to make sure that the provision they're receiving is of good quality. So what I'd like to ask the panelists is this going to change anything if this were to happen? Is this just a side issue? Is this really not where the solution lies? Or is this a distraction? Or is it what we should be focusing on? And maybe at the same time we can talk a little bit about the curriculum and the way schools are held accountable in general for GCSE results and progress aid. There's a couple of questions that we put to me from the audience about curriculum. One being about this idea of whether the accountability measures such as progress aid are actually driving schools to exclude children. Should we have a different accountability measure? Should we have more vocational options, for example? So we can talk a little bit about that. Ed, do you want to jump in first as an acting head teacher?
Yeah, I'm going to say something which I didn't think carefully about before, so it may not be the right thing to say. So my school has got some really good results, and last summer our results results are going to be published and they're going to be slightly less good than our progress. And part of the reason for that, there are lots of different reasons, but part of the reason for that is that we supported a group of very, very vulnerable children last year. And my answer to your question, Kath, would be no. Like, I would be quite, I don't think that keeping those results of those individual pupils doesn't make a difference, because any head teacher will tell you that they could improve their progress rate by 0.1, 0.2, 0.5, 0.8 if they didn't educate the children who need the most support. And they could reallocate that time to educating to driving up the exam results of other children. The question for me is about how do you incentivize, support head teachers to only make the decision to exclude, and I think head teachers need to have that capacity, but they only make that decision when it is the absolutely last resort. And I think if you're confident that that is happening in the system, then you feel good about the decision that those head teachers are making. And what happens to those pupils afterwards is of everyone's concern because of the kinds of systems that we talked about in the last answer. But I don't think you need to incentivize head teachers, you need to support head teachers to make the right decisions. I don't think you need to use a stick to discourage them from something, which I think will be relatively minor discouragement compared to the huge benefits that they can get in terms of the capacity and money-based issue.
I'll ask Jeff to speak as well, and then if any of the other panelists have an opinion or want to speak, then you're welcome to let me know
So if we're talking about curriculum and qualifications, we've got a system problem. Right? So if you take GCSEs this year, in our brave new world with all of these grades which are now labelled G7, 8s and 9s, and we've spent a lot of time rethinking GCSEs, making them harder, talking about academic rigour and so on. That's been the obsession of the government, so that you've now got 4% of children getting their grade 9, and is now talking, do we need a grade 10 and so on. This summer, what was the number of children who, in their national language, in English, got a grade 3, 2 or a 1? And the reason I ask that question is that a grade 4 is called a standard pass, a grade 5 is called a good pass. So how many children after 12 years of being taught by early years, primary teachers, secondary teachers, got a grade 3? And what would you call a grade 3 if standard pass is grade 4? The answer, 190,000 children. That was the same last year, it'll be the same this year, because we use a system called comparable outcomes, which basically stops grade inflation. It holds a forgotten third. You can't leave school with the dignity of a qualification. Now, until we have something which is going to motivate and keep some young people thinking, actually there is something in it for me, that I can hold up something that says in my basics of English and my basics of maths, I have got the dignity of something, we will not have the motivation for some young people. And I'm not falling into the enemy of promise camp here, honest, but as one young person in FE College doing his third research of GCSE English said to me, I now understand it. For those 2/3 to pass, I have to fail. That has to be a disgusting starting point for an education system which is spending £100,000 on every child, with 100,000 teachers and more trying to get that child to do something at the end of it. Now I know that doesn't quite answer your question, but you can see what it does do is to raise questions about whether there shouldn't be other things that recognise success, so that young people want to stay in the system and aren't alienated by it.
And a technicality, there is a strong, the new system, they did bring in a system called the National Reference Test, which we haven't mentioned.
So the interesting thing about the National Reference Test, which is designed in order to say, have standards gone up this year or gone down? In English this year, they went down, and in maths, they went up. So what happened in English with the National Reference Test? Nothing. So a third have to do badly, 35% this year, in order that 65% have to do well. A lot of money has been spent on that National Reference Test. This year, nothing happened as a result.
I just want to talk about narrowing. So one of the things that we're talking about is using the power of the phone. And actually, absolutely, we should have a focus on children passing English and maths. Of course, we should be on our children English. But also, we can't look at everything. And I think we forget that actually some children are incredibly skilled in different ways and we aren't utilising. So again, 18 years ago, my first started work-related learning courses were right. So some young people that might be going out their days for the weekend doing plumbing, construction, motor mechanics, also have the opportunity to learn the trade. Now, when we talk about young people at risk of exclusion now, it's 4 to 1, and we talk about different options they can have, it's incredibly limited. I can't find want to go in that route, and that's perfectly acceptable. So I think there's also concern about what we value in academic sector. You know, and I'm going to be the first person, when my car breaks down, I'm going to bring that motor mechanic. There's nothing wrong with that. Just like we need the academics to work, we need the politicians, we need everyone else. Actually, to run society or function, we need to be teaching these children this.
Yeah, I always find that, well, what is it that we go into education in school for? It should be about learning the ability to learn and learning how to enjoy learning. And, I think we kind of look back to, the classroom of now to the classroom of the Victorian era in terms of everybody sitting, straightforward, and that was going to train our young people to be able to go and work in factories in the future. But are we making sure that our kids, exactly kind of what Sarah was saying, have got the skills to be able to go and get a job afterwards? Not always. Are we making sure that we develop them so that they enjoy and love learning? Because if you've got a system that is set up that some kids will fail, well, how do they know that they're enjoying learning? And if we're going and we are not giving kids, all of those other subjects, the ones that I benefited from, such as arts, music, drama, and the ability to learn in those areas. I thought I hated history at school. It turns out I love it. I just hated the way that I was taught history at school. But I love history via the history of theatre, via the history of politics. I don't necessarily love the kings, queens, whatever it was we were. I didn't do very well in my GCSE history, by the way. But managing to go and make kids enthusiastic about learning, having that desire to read because I'm reading something that I want to read, rather than because I'm reading something that I'm forced to read in terms of a text, has to be kind of where we really look to go and take our education in the future, because learning is fantastic, and a lot of our kids don't realise that because the system's not set up to make sure that they kind of know that.
I'd like to invite some people in the audience who are working in, so I know we've got some people who are working in various different areas such as the police or CAMS mental health, and I know we've got one person who's working in one of the mental health pilots. I'm quite interested in different models that people in the room have seen, and if anyone's got any questions related to those, of how different agencies are working together. So for example, I know in the South West London mental health pilot, we've got CAMS working with the local authority, working with schools, working with groups, and doing a lot more preventative work. Has anybody in the audience got questions around that, around the youth violence, around interaction between schools and police, multi-agency work that they'd like to speak about or bring their experience in? Anthony, would you like to introduce yourself and say where you work and answer the question?
Yeah, my name's Anthony Gaultier. I'm lucky. Thank you. I know I'm lucky because I was a primary head teacher. I opened sub-inclusive learning services in Southwark for Bruce, police officer. I don't know if you've seen the $100 race before. Anyone seen that? Yeah? I was on the line. Like Junior, I didn't have as colourful a life as Junior, but I had a difficult life as Junior. And actually, I should have been permanent student from school at 11. But I met a musician who taught me music, and that opened my doors to do all the things I did later. I want to pick up on one point. As a police officer, I'm now a senior officer in the Met Police. As a police officer, our work is to engage with young people. We try to grow cadets, young cadets of all races. We're trying to work in schools more directly. I want to pick up the point that you said about the zero exclusions. Being a secondary head teacher, in a primary head teacher, you'll never get school leaders to buy into that with that kind of narrative. Because schools need a system in place to support children who cannot cope in mainstream school. Now, it doesn't mean it's all about behaviour. There are a number of reasons why children cannot cope in mainstream schools, and some are emotional. Some of the reasons are long embedded in them from childhood, and some are just community-based, and Julie knows all about that kind of stuff. So, if you're really going to make a difference and get head teachers to buy into your narrative, you've got to change it, and you've got to bring head teachers to work with the government to enable children of all walks of life to succeed in an education system which is catering their needs. And we're not going to talk about history, so I'm really big on history, and we've forgotten a big part of history, black history, and I don't want to go there, it's a 2-hour debate. But we really need to start thinking very differently about how we engage schools to engage young people to make positive and enjoy learning.
Thanks, Ashley. Rob Lowe, I don't know if Rob Lowe is also in the room. He did send from the Relationships Foundation, the CEO. He sent in a question as well, similarly saying, challenging the Lib Dems claim that we need to get zero exclusions. I'd like that to hear from the panel about, is that realistic and is that possible?
The reason why I really connected with what he was saying, when you was all talking about education, I didn't want to come into the doom gloom, you see, because it's easy for someone like me to be critical, but I was thinking, oh my gosh, the amount of young people I'm working with that are miseducated, and that means that they already have, we talk about first childhood experiences, they've got a first childhood experience education, what it means, and there's loads of kids that we're working with that have got this disconnect with, so like when I dropped out of school, I remember a teacher telling me that I was gonna fail, and I was out, never went back. But somehow I ended up becoming a straight A student, a first class degree, MA, and doing my PhD. See, I get it, Captain, he doesn't get it, nice. But here's what happened. I was at uni and I was struggling. The second year I actually had a really bad grade, and the teacher said to me, don't worry, Julie, you're brilliant. You're absolutely brilliant. You just look at things in a different way. And after that, I'm not even joking, every single grade was a first. And that is the difference. Trying to study stuff that interests me. So I was studying things like grades, I studied Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, I studied all of the great Saul Alinsky, and these are the things that really got me powered up and charged and thinking about actually. I remember sitting in class and looking around and saying, like, all my other students, I'm like, wow, like, one of us is looking like there's potential, but some of us are going to be leaders, and I think that's potentially what's missing. Because when I'm working with young kids, they are leaders. They are potentially the leaders of tomorrow. They just don't see it that way, and they see everything in deficit. I was saying to this kid earlier because he set up his own business. He was the first one that was saying to me, he's not the business person. He was drug running, involved in candidates. He said, Jay, I'm not the one that wears a suit. I'm not the one that's operating my business. I said, but you are. And you are working like 52-hour weeks, but you are doing that illegally, making someone else money. Now, here's the deal. It's coming up to the end of the financial year, and I'm not saying anything about how the Conservatives and like private businesses up in the air, but his business turnover was 80,000. It's going to be 80,000. Now, he's the first one that will say there's more money to be made legitimately than there is ever illegally. Now, you see, he had the skill, he just didn't have, he had the skill, he just didn't have the will. And it's down to the adults around him to motivate that, draw it out of them and show them that it is possible, and also to believe it. And that's what I felt.
I just want to add to the idea of legitimate opportunity. So Julie knows spoken about before that I teach social at the moment, I teach social fund. And we talk about the legitimate
average paid for a child in APM to the age of 16 is £18,000 a year, and then the next year they receive £4,000 for their education. And we have a problem with transition to next destinations after 18. So one of the things we're calling for at the Centre for Social Justice, and I'd love to see your thoughts on this in terms of policy, is this idea that we should extend AP or provide funding that helps those children transition, because they don't have GCSEs by 16, and we need to give them that extra support, even to the age of 19, give them an extra year to achieve those qualifications. Really important.
I think in terms of zero expulsions, what we've been said is an aspiration towards zero expulsions, and what that does involve in terms of getting around to doing that is making sure that every bit of support for the kids is expelled, is put in place. We know that crews are 3 times more expensive than state schools, so it's about resources and making sure that the state school system is properly resourced to be able to put in everything in place as soon as possible to try and ensure that we're able to, that we try to ensure that the expulsions that can be used as the kind of first answer then become the absolute last answer. And I don't know if there's anybody that would disagree with that. I hope not anyway. And then in terms of kind of additional support kind of afterwards, and I think you're right, not necessarily, if you could find a way of making the AP just work for short periods and not the kind of long-term periods that we're talking about, but actually making sure that support, and actually it's supporting the whole loads of other areas as well in terms of the transitioning, so around the care system and the support that's in place for our young people, the fact that kind of some of our young people are just cut off at certain points in terms of that support isn't the way we need to go about. But I think it's not just in one area, I think it's actually in a whole range of different areas that we need to make sure that that's looked at and addressed.
So just to pick up this idea of 0% exclusions and whether it's an aim which is achievable. So as a school leader, you have to ultimately have some line in the sand. You have to be able to say, if you continue to behave in that way, which is threatening, violent, aggressive, defiant, undermining the learning of other people, despite all the chances and resources we've given you, you will not be able to continue as a part of this community. And there is a system for doing that, where you know as a head, when you take that decision, you are open to challenge on that, and you sit with governors, but you also have a member of the local authority challenging that decision, and you have to be pretty robust in doing it. And I had one of those overturned once and felt humiliated about it. It feels like a really big step. The bit we would be more worried about is where people, in order to avoid that process, off-roll youngsters. And we've got about 10,000 young people who are simply missing. And that is a system which we think is unethical. We've had ethics talked about here. And ASCL set up and has worked with other organisations on the ethical framework. And we call out those schools which we think are doing things which they shouldn't be doing. And essentially it's a fairly easy thing to do as the new head or the new chief exec going into a place where you say, behaviour is not good enough in this school, your child is in year 10 or year 11, he or she is going to be excluded permanently unless you decide to homeschool them. And so we've got this dubious notion of homeschooling, which isn't really schooling, opening young people up to county lines and that. That we think is a major problem. But what you would be able to do, I think, is if you had whatever we call it, this partnership board, which when I permanently exclude legitimately those children, and they then move to a PRU, that what the board is doing is a starting point of saying, let's have a look at the children who have been excluded, let's look at how they're doing in academic terms, let's look at destinations data to see where do those children end up at the age of 21, for example. So you start to build up a database of how are we doing on behalf of this community. That seems to me a way of taking us away from simply acting in the interest of the establishment and not in the interest of the whole community.
Can I open it up to the floor for any questions? Just pop your hands up, anything on this subject. So we've got about just over 10 minutes left. If we can take a few different questions, then the first thing we can answer the question particularly relevant, which is quite interesting then. So a few in the middle there and then
Okay, Doug Menzies from the Centre for Education and Youth. My question is to a panel, a rapid one. If you were advising a senior leader who sat in a senior leadership team meeting this evening, considering whether or not to exclude a young person, what advice would you give them?
What I'll do is we'll take a few questions and then Alice will decide which ones they're going to answer.
Hi, Kendrick Fowler. I speak on a panel meeting on Sunday about my struggle with special needs. When I was 13, after several battles with my parents in the school, I basically left school, and was homeschooled for about 2 years. I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do to improve special needs education so to avoid this happening in the future.
Good evening, Patricia Moore, Aspire Education Group. No one has actually talked about the racial disparity of school exclusions, particularly fixed term exclusions, which I'm very disturbed to see are over 400,000 a year. And many children are excluded continuously. What is actually being done? Because I don't think the Tinsley report was going anywhere near addressing the racial disparity of school exclusions, even though it was set up under the racial disparity to address that. Many people have completely dismissed it from that point of view. So I wanted to ask about the racial disparity. And the second point, which I think is aligned to that, is the racial disparity of school leadership. There is no shape, space or form that the school leadership governance of this school actually represents the children that it serves. We're talking about a third of children nationally, primary and secondary, according to DFE terms, are minority-based. What is actually being done? Because in that sense, we know who is doing this food. And how is that going to be changed?
Just to bring the stats on those as well. So we've got, in terms of the Timpson review, Patricia's very right, they did not address the issue of race. They had one recommendation for the Timpson review that was specifically related to race, which was about school leadership. So they were recommending investing in getting more people of colour into school leadership positions. That's the one recommendation to do with race. And they also, what they did was looked at school exclusion rates in a new way, kind of controlling for other factors, and they found out that one of the higher groups was Black Caribbeans, which was 1.7 times more likely than white British children to be permanently excluded, even after controlling for factors such as poverty and location. Also, in terms of coming back to the special needs, children with social, emotional, and mental health needs were 3.8 times more likely to be excluded after controlling for other factors than children without social, emotional, mental health needs. So really, it's great that we're talking about that issue. And then final question on the front, and then if you choose what question.
Hi, I'm Kate Shades. I'm a parent carer representative for the Suffolk Parent Carer Network. I'm also here representing people with learning disabilities and autism and 4 dimensions. I kind of want to talk about accountability. I think that families aren't heard, they're not used as partners, and they're having to try and make people accountable. That's a problem. I think also teachers aren't supported and taught how to identify and support children with special educational needs, learning disabilities, learning difficulties, and speech and language and communication issues. And without that really early intervention, people are disenfranchised by the end of preschool.
Laws are quite clear around the on several occasions I've said this does not meet the criteria of the exclusion. You have to talk about X, Y, Z. But also I think there's a technicality on the legal side. Actually, the local authority doesn't uphold that exclusion. And they have that child very front of the school. They need to have very good conversations with the school and stuff and see them. And then if it goes to the independent review panel after the government's there, they still can't direct the school to take that child. But then also as a parent, I don't think I would want my child to go back to that school regardless. I will stop there.
So we were called into a situation very recently where a knife was found in the kid's bag. He hadn't used it, but everybody was on it from the school exclusion perspective, and I totally understand it. You can see from parents' perspective, if I had a child and my child was harmed and it turned out that kid had his knife, I would actually want to take that responsibility. But our advice is to treat on a case-by-case basis and actually to look at the wider issues. The reason why I'm saying that is there's a reason that you don't apply. And I've also spoken to someone who said, when they do the knife, there's no knives in the schools, but actually the knife is outside, in the bush, just outside of the school grounds. And it doesn't, just because it doesn't happen within the school, doesn't mean that we're not kind of complicit in that behaviour. So I say you have to treat on a case-by-case basis. You also have to have, kind of understand the nuances, the abilities of the groups, such as gangs and child sex exploitation groups, criminal exploitation groups are using, and it's not as simple as just speak the truth and everything will be alright. In fact, there's going to be very, very real consequences of this game, and there's very, very real consequences of this section we're talking now, and the young kids, we see this all the time in the school, kind of sessions, kids feel over-policed and underprotected. They will not go to a teacher, they will not go to a police officer, they will not go to a parent to talk about what is actually happening. So one of the reasons why we've been oversubscribed in our local schools is because we've been able to get a safe space for young people who are really real about what they're experiencing, real about their issues, and also in that space really tell them that there are confidential ways of reporting there are, and also get them to know that police officers, for example, police officers are well-being are respected more so because they've got more of a trusted relationships than the ones that just on the street, which is combative and conservative. So that was our advice, and that's the difference I think that relationships make, and that's also one of the reasons why the money that was taken out of schools has had a catastrophic effect. And I've got all my bones to that. We've got all that's happening right now is the wing of the city, so 7-8 years ago.
I would say on the point about parents, I think when we opened our school in 2012, we made a decision quite late that we were all going to be on first name terms. And I think that's had an incredibly positive impact in terms of building kind of relationships of trust and equal relationships, I think, between staff and parents. I think we do visits before every child starts at school, and I think those sorts of things can foster a sense of mutual accountability and mutual responsibility. I think parents need to be supported to really advocate for their children, and that's part of, I think, the role of the school, and I'm pleased. I think time's done that well, and we continue to work to do that. I think the question about special needs is really relevant. For me, it's like probably the most broken part of the system. I would be tempted to break it completely and start completely from scratch. The children with the most complex needs tend not to have the plans. In many cases, the statutory plans tell you more about, I think, parental income and parental level of education. I think there are children starting school in reception with very, very complex needs and then having an incredibly distressing experience themselves and their families having very, very damaging and traumatic experiences because there isn't necessarily the expertise, or there is the expertise, but the very, very high pressure on school budget, on local authority SEN budget. So to me, that's an area where the atomised system that Jeff talked about at the beginning has yielded a really broken system in a lot of communities. And it's interesting when groups of head teachers get together, they will always tell you that their area has the most problematic SEN set up. And so I think for me that's an area where there's a real need for kind of leadership and creative thinking about what we can do.
I guess kind of the question that I need to go and answer on is the Timson's review and whether or not anything's happened with it. I think Colin's been a little bit chaotic, in case anyone's seen that, yeah. And so I think in some ways, you know, the kind of frustration in terms of what's happening with parts of it are rightly felt. But we need to keep pushing to make sure that the recommendations within there, which were some good recommendations, are actually happening. In terms of teachers, I'm just kind of jumping onto a bit of the stuff happening. So we all know that teachers are overworked. We know that there aren't enough resources into schools. So I'm saying this in the right. Imagine we managed to put all of the resources in to be able to do this rather than just putting on teachers without giving them that. But I think that we should have, trauma-informed training for all the teachers and actually all agencies that come into contact with young people, as well as unconscious bias training, kind of particularly within police and other agencies as well, and sex and relationship education, and actually starting that at a much younger age. So in primary school, it doesn't need to be about the sex bit in terms of the education stuff, but it does need to be about the relationships and what other relationships look like. And I think all the points around special educational needs, and I can say that as an MP in Lewisham Deptford, this comes up time and time again. And indeed, even those middle class parents who are able to go and get the plans in place for their kids will admit we are able to do this, we are able to break through the system, but what about everybody else? And that, absolutely happens time and time again, and I don't think you speak to many people on the ground that would say that that's true, and actually perhaps we do need to start dismantling in terms of how we go and make that work for the future, because it's definitely not right the way it is at the moment.
Okay, three quick responses to what's been said. So first of all, Loic's question about what advice would you give to a head who's looking to permanently exclude. You're always balancing the needs of the child against the needs of the community more widely. Parents probably don't want a child who's been excluded for carrying a knife to continue in the school. So you're always making that judgment. In the current system, you follow your behaviour plan, and you know you're going to be challenged about it, you follow the plan and then you permanently exclude. In the brave new world we're talking about, you do exactly the same thing, knowing that what the board or whatever it is we've been calling it going to do is to hold all of you accountable for what happened to that child, both in terms of destinations and in terms of academic performance and other things. Secondly, the diversity question, which we haven't answered significantly enough. It's the most important question of the night. And it's embarrassing for me as a white, middle-aged, middle-class man to say this, but it's the biggest issue for us at our school because we represent 19,000 leaders who don't represent what children look like and in fact don't represent what the teacher work looks like. It's an even bigger issue when you get to governance, 96% of whom are white. So we are saying this year onwards, this has to be the biggest challenge. And given that we're a trade union, our first part of this is how do we attract people to represent gender in a different way, sexual orientation and race or ethnic background in a different way, so that our council starts to become more effective. We're at the beginning of that process with 12 new people joining council who are more representative. The bigger challenge is how do we then start feeding that into our schools and colleges so that you start, when you were appointing a teacher or appointing someone to your leadership team, to start being more diverse in that appointment. But watch this space. And I'm embarrassed by it insofar as how can I as a white person, as a middle-aged white and all that man, have credibility? Well, maybe I've got the power to be able to argue for that and tell the story to try and help to make it happen. And the third point, which is essentially about parents and so on, that is always a difficult one. Parents' voice comes through the governing body of a school, and I know that it's problematic, that has to be an area we strengthen, because that whole notion of local representation is something we're all worried about having been lost in some parts of the university.
That's right. No, thank you. I'm afraid we're going to have to finish now because our time is up. Thank you all for coming. Do stay and chat and reach out to people afterwards. Please do help yourself to drinks and snacks at the end and then send them back to the kitchen. Really nice to see you all.